Hey friends, welcome back to Guess What? Compliance Can Be Simple. I'm your host, Dr. Natasha Guess, and today's episode is one I consider foundational for small healthcare teams because we're going to walk through 7 HIPAA gaps that appear consistently across practices regardless of their size or complexity or even their specialty. These gaps are rarely intentional. They don't come from disregard for patient privacy. They actually come from growth, change, and day-to-day pressure. The problem with HIPAA gaps is that they rarely announce themselves. They tend to sit unnoticed until something triggers scrutiny, a complaint, or an internal issue that was found. My goal today is to help you recognize these gaps early, understand why they happen, and know what to do to correct them in a realistic way. Let's go into these gaps. The first one that I'd like to focus on is outdated risk assessments. What is it? This is a risk assessment that no longer reflects your current operations, your technology, or your services. And these risk assessments are often completed once and filed away. Why this occurs? Risk assessments are often completed once and filed away by your practice. Over time, you may add new tools, new vendors, or even new services without revisiting the assessment. And that is a big red flag if you have a risk assessment that was done in 2020 and we're now in 2026. But there is a way to fix this. A risk assessment is a living document. You don't need to start from scratch every year, but you do need to revisit them when meaningful changes occur. You assign ownership and review at least annually or when your workflow changes. The second one that I find very often that is not done or focused on are BAAs that do not match vendor activity. A BAA is a business associate agreement. You have them, they exist. Hopefully you have them and they exist. But it no longer reflects what the vendor is actually doing. And this can occur because vendor roles often expand over time. And then what started as a scheduling support may now involve access to your clinical data. This is all going on, but your BAAs have not changed. They haven't been updated to reflect what is actually occurring. And then you forget about it. Now, there is a way to fix it. You should be reviewing your BAAs alongside your vendor workflows. And you should be asking what data the vendor accesses today, not what they accessed when the contract was signed. When you look at your BAAs, you need to ensure that everything in that contract matches exactly what you expect from your vendor today, tomorrow. In the future, you will need to look back at that contract and update it as things change, as things update, and even when you change a vendor. Now, the next gap I'd like to speak about is shared or unclear access controls. What do I mean? That is shared logins or unclear role-based access to your systems. This occurs because it oftentimes feels convenient and it saves the parties time. But over time, if this is occurring frequently, accountability is lost. There is nowhere to track who logged in, when, where, how, and why. But you can fix this. You should implement unique user access tied to roles. Remove access promptly when roles change. This supports both your security and audit response. I want to pause here for a moment because there's a pattern emerging. Notice the pattern. These gaps come from things not being revisited, not from people ignoring HIPAA. This is important to keep in mind as we move into training, because training gaps develop the exact same way. The next gap is inconsistent HIPAA training. What is this? It is training that happens once a year with little reinforcement. And this occurs because training is treated as a compliance task rather than an operational support tool. There are ways to fix this. First, it starts with how you think about training and HIPAA. And then you can use short, role-specific refreshers. Reinforce your expectations for HIPAA through real scenarios instead of using dense presentations. When you use presentations, people oftentimes they go through the presentation just because they have to, and they're done. Now, if you use real scenarios, for instance, your front desk team members, you have them there and you use a scenario. Okay, here's a patient that is coming to you. Your computer is facing the patient. They can see every single thing that you are doing. And guess what? That patient is actually an auditor. Your auditor writes you up. You get a corrective action plan. And now you have to follow that CAP from beginning to end. You have to follow up with the auditor, with CMS, with the state regulator. And now instead of your day being focused on your patient, it's now focused on getting everything in that CAP corrected. And it's focused on meetings with the state regulator, the auditor, CMS, whoever it is. Doing a training that is focused on that, on a real base scenario, that'll help your team members to remember what to do and what not to do. See the difference? Okay. The next gap I would like to focus on is unclear patient access workflows. This happens often, and what it is that teams know patient access is required, but can't clearly explain the process. You have an auditor that steps into your office, interviews your team members. Walk me through your process for accessing patient information. They know what it is, but they don't know the process because it's not something that they do every single day. It's not something that's reinforced on a daily basis or a weekly basis. So every team member in that interview shows the auditor something different. That is a gap. And auditors, they find gaps quickly. Now, this can occur because responsibility is assumed but not documented. Every team member thinks that another member is handling this, but it's not documented. Requests are handled differently depending on who receives them. You may receive a request today and you go through it and you do it this way, but then tomorrow another team member receives that same request, but they are handling it their way. See what I mean? There is not a standard processing across the board. We can actually fix this. We can document a simple, consistent workflow, train every staff member on where requests go and who tracks them, who handles the output data. Have this all written down step by step and ensure that everyone is following it, is signing their name to this document that they have reviewed, they understand, and they will adhere to this workflow. The next gap is incident response plans that are never practiced. And I know every practice may or should have an incident response, and team members should know about them. However, this is often lacking. So what does this mean for this gap? It means that you have an incident response plan. It definitely exists on paper, but has never been tested. Your team assume incidents are rare, and they oftentimes do not want to discuss them. We can fix this as well. As the leader or manager or supervisor or owner of your practice, you should walk through hypothetical scenarios periodically with your team members, and remember that practicing this, it reduces hesitation and it improves response from your staff. Another gap that I find very often occurs is that policies, you have them, but they do not match your real workflow or the real work. Policies describe your ideal workflows that no longer reflect reality. These are the policies that I am speaking of. The ones that you have there that's been sitting on your desk, sitting on a drawer, sitting in a file cabinet, but in actuality, it does not reflect what happens in real life. Policies are written once, maybe twice, but you have not updated that policy as your operations evolve over time. There is an easy fix to this. You update policies to reflect how your work is actually done today. And remember that in doing this, accuracy always matters more than a formality. So update that policy, update that procedure, update that workflow, and ensure that it matches what you and your team or your staff is currently doing in your practice. Now, you all know I like my mini audit moments, so here we go. This week, pick one gap and ask yourself, when was the last time this was reviewed? Who owns it? What has changed since the last time it was reviewed? Awareness is the first corrective step. HIPAA gaps are manageable when they're identified early and addressed intentionally. Remember, compliance is not about eliminating all risk. It's about reducing preventable risk. So as you go along this week, whether you're in your car, in a staff meeting, or just simply reviewing HIPAA documents, keep it simple, stay compliant, and protect your patients.